Hey guys, this is Allison Taylor from, of course, this class, and so, I want to start by saying I know I am using a smartphone to video this video right now, but I have a reason, even though we were told not to do it. It's because this chapter is literally written on digital imaging and photography for phone cameras, and of course, digital cameras too, but the fact is, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of variety, and it's a little hard to describe my own camera that I use normally for videos when I have to actually record this video. So, with that, I want to be a little bit outside the lines. Hopefully, hopefully I will not get marked down too much for this. I'm so sorry, but I thought it would be such a genius idea. I don't normally use my phone. It's kind of stupid. It's not as good of a resolution, but I'll get into that. So, first starters, of course, like I said, hey guys, I'm Allison Taylor. I would love for you guys to flip to the background page on the digital imaging PowerPoint. So of course, background for starters, I want to talk a little bit about the, of course, first photos, the first photography uses. And so one of them being the lithograph. So the lithograph was created, and the first photo to really be considered was, of course, Joseph Niceph's photo in 1826, an 8-hour exposure of his backyard with a lithograph, in which he, of course, with a lithograph, it's like a glass plate, uses kind of like a reflecting light that reflects light onto whatever you're using to record it onto. And so a lot of what he used was a Judea plate, which is kind of like asphalt, in which he recorded light onto it. And it took 8 hours, like I said, and he called it holography, but it didn't last very long because the daguerreotype came out, which is a little bit quicker and a little bit more detailed. And so the first selfie ever taken was of Robert Cornelius. And Robert Cornelius, of course, used his daguerreotype, took off the lens, ran, sat down, and sat there for 5 minutes. Imagine sitting for a photo for 5 minutes. I can't even imagine. Think of all the photos you take of your kids and those little kids who can't even stand there for 2 seconds. Try taking a photo of them for 5 minutes. No wonder they have so many pictures of just like, they've got the entire family, and then the baby's face is like blurred the whole time. Now we can all understand and be like, what's so creepy about this baby photo? Well, they didn't have the shutter speed as they do now. And so with that, you can skip to the next page, and you can see the two photos. One looks like a sketch. That's how little detail the lithograph gave you. It literally just used light reflections. And then of course the self-portrait also used more similar to the lithograph, but a little bit more use of detail. And so with that, let's move on to what became sooner or later of that. And so with, of course, kind of peeking into the past still, the habits of photo manipulation. And so the habits of photo manipulation weren't just used today. So if you think of, when you think of photo manipulation, you think of those poorly done Photoshop photos, or maybe even selfies, or these women and girls are editing all the blemishes off their face so that it becomes completely clear, and you're like, wow, that's very edited. Or even where it's the newsrooms are using 2 different photos to create one to create sensationalism. And so that has been done for years. And so 1906 was one of the first recording photo manipulations of the San Francisco earthquake. Another huge controversy happened with the 1982 photo of the pyramids that National Geographic used to put on their cover. Now, National Geographic is known for being kind of purist when it comes to photography, because they want to capture life as it is and all over the world with different habits. But this time, they made a boo-boo, and they ended up moving the pyramid much closer to the other just to get it in the photo, to kind of give a better, more dynamic photo for their cover. But it ended up being a hot mess, because they kind of went against their own values, really. And so, of course, last but not least, today and age, like I mentioned before, photo editing applications and systems like Photoshop are often used now as photo manipulation. And so we're really kind of manipulating the truth, really. And so now I want to kind of give you a background as, of course, of the history of the digital camera. So 1975, you have the Kodak prototype, where it's the first one where it recorded things onto a sensor that was really, really big because it was the size of a toaster. That's kind of huge. Imagine carrying a toaster around. That's really annoying. And so even toasters today have gotten smaller. So it was a 0.1 megapixels, which is huge. Like, it's just terrible, terrible resolution. And so with those megapixels were huge. Just so things were just, it was hard to get a really good, solid picture. At least digitally. Sony, of course, altered that a little bit more with creating the magnetic video camera, where kind of using video stills, really, kind of like video cameras came out for recording onto film tapes, but these were kind of like stills within those videos. And so they could be recorded digitally. And of course, 1990, Dicam created the memory chip in a camera, which kind of changed the game, really. Even though they were using monochromatic grayscale, but they're still coming up on a sensor. And then, of course, in 1994, Apple takes the kind of the building blocks of what has been set and creates the Apple QuickTake 100, which is the first DSL. And so it's the first optical lens camera that records digitally, which is really cool. And then, of course, 1995, Kodak, of course, alters even more, creates the DC-40, and then, of course, it gets smaller with the Sony CyberShot and the DSC. And so with that, we come to, of course, the cameras page. So let's kind of get into what cameras are. So we've got the DSL, the DSCs, and the DSLRs. And so the single lens cameras and the single lens reflex cameras are a lot like the still film cameras. They still use mirrors and lenses too, but they record onto a sensor. And so they, of course, react onto the sensor, and the pixels on the sensor record the image resolution. And so the pixels pick up light. And so they record things in light shades, but there are filters on the sensor, whether red, green, or blue, similar to used on TV and recording, to be kind of capture light wavelengths, similar to our eyes, where our eyes pick up the light, and the reflection of the wavelengths, of the color wavelengths off the light, create color in our eyes with the color cones in our inside of our eyes, off of our retinas. And of course, the sensors are actually, though they're not as big as the lens. Surprisingly, actually, most cameras, they're about 18 by 13.5 millimeters, and even if the lens is a little bit bigger than that, the sensor is smaller. And so it kind of gives a normal 4:3 ratio. Most digital cameras do have this, and so they have a smaller, it's not necessarily a smaller lens, but really it records only a certain amount of what is actually being seen through the lens. And so that is a typical sensor. But there are a lot of cameras, much like mine, which is called a full frame. And the full frame captures the full 35 millimeters. So the entirety of what the camera is seeing, you get to see. So what I'm gonna do here is actually I'm gonna put my phone down a little bit. And so I'm gonna kind of describe to you what's a little bit on the inside of this thing. And so with the DSLRs, you've got the lens. And so with the lens is a series of glass that is administered throughout this whole thing. There's a couple different concave and concise lenses, or kind of think about a glasses lens. They're curved usually. And so same thing as the inside of this thing. And so though I have a flat one to catch light, like reflect light a little bit to catch better, in here, it reflects through each other into the mirror. The mirror reflects, of course, onto the sensor. And so then the sensor records it. And then, of course, it records it into the computer so I can see it on the computer screen. And what I have, of course, is the 18.55 millimeters. And so this one's a little bit bigger for macro shooting on my camera right now. But it's really great. I actually really, really like the photos I get from this thing. That's kind of a little bit of an anatomy of your typical DSLRs now. And cameras, and so I'm having a little bit of trouble here. Give me one moment. Oh, this thing kind of gets put back in here. I guess some of you camera wizards are probably cringing right now as I do this. So of course, with that, we're gonna move on to the next page. And so the next page is onto phone cameras. So just like this beautiful iPhone 7 that I'm using right now, we're gonna get into, so the cameras on a phone actually started in 2000 with the Sharp J phone, which came out of Japan with the first phone camera. Personally, I'm not old enough to know, even though I am a 1992 baby, I was not old enough to use a phone in 2000, so I did not know that was a thing. And so I learned a little bit more about the Sharp J, but by the time I was using phones, the disruptive innovation was starting to kick into gear. And disruptive innovation, digital imaging, is a lot of what like iPhone and Android uses nowadays. And so with that, it's basically, disruptive innovation is just new ways images are captured, taking innovative camera quality to phones. And so with that, they're creating multi-aperture and like cameras onto phones, which means that they're trying their best to create on phones what we see in our eyes and even in very good professional cameras. And so multi-layer, so things aren't as flat. And so they're even introducing like 3D photo capture to make it even more like in like depth of eye. So though we may be seeing, we're not like, things aren't flat, where I can tell with when I'm looking into my kitchen, the light of course is this light above me is closer than the wall on the backside and the oven and the sink, and but things are coming in layers. So of course the first layer is a little bit more blurry, the far layer is clear, the mid layer is mid blur, but it's like one of my eyes are focusing in on. And so if I focus in on what's closest to me, the things blur out. It's just, that's how aperture works actually. That's how the lens on here works. So if you're turning closer on the aperture, you'll see the first thing that it catches. And then the farther you turn it out, the farther thing will be caught and the front things won't be. So much like our eyes. And so also what they're trying to start using is light field technology, which I'll get into, which has to do with data versus light imaging. And so of course within that, let's get into computational photography. So basically computational photography is just a reconstruction based on multiple imaging sources. And so whether HDR is an example of this, panoramic digital photos, and light field photography. And so basically it becomes about what they want to try to do is make this as comprehensive as the way we see. And so basically the way we see is light reflects into our optic lens, which hits our retinas, which records color and the cones in our eyes. And what happens is what's actually being caught and what's actually being seen is just what the light is reflecting off of. And of course the color wavelengths are bouncing into our eyes as well. And so it's what our eyes are recording, what the light is touching. But what the light isn't really touching, it's what our minds are actually creating for us. And so because my brain has recorded the entirety of my kitchen in my brain, so I know what it looks like even with my eyes closed, when I'm looking in a certain area, it may only actually be seeing a very certain area, but my brain is filling in the gaps. And so that's what light field photography is doing now. And so what it does is, instead of using more of like lenses to reflect light in a way where it catches everything, it just sucks in the light into either a sphere or a grate, and it records onto, of course, the sensors, but it uses algorithms to fill in the rest of the picture. Wild, just like our brains. And so it becomes data sharing instead of light shedding. And so with that, that creates, of course, digital images. And so within digital images, we spend a lot more time with what's called jump to screen. And so digital images are easier to post on things like social media than to have printed out. And so it was easy to grab the film container out of the film cartridge, take it to the store, leave it there for an hour and come back, and then you'd have a pack full of photos. Nowadays, we can just give it to where we want to immediately. And so with that, we are either taking photos from our phone, distribute it to our computer, or even our digital camera, to our phone, to our computers, and back again. It can all be done, but it's not actually physically coming out in front of us. And so there is nowadays a lot less photos being physically printed, but rather there is more being digitally recorded and shared. And so with that, it creates the requirement for applications on the phones that you're using to be able to, I guess, distribute all of these photos that you're using. And so one of the most common used apps now, which actually surprised me, because I'm not a huge avid user of Combine apps, is actually Combine apps. I know the Combine apps are applications where you can line up photos or videos together, add stickers, clip art, whatever, to give kind of like a slideshow. Or even things like Snapchat, where you're snapping a photo and then you're adding to it. And so you're combining things together. And another thing, though, quickly beneath that is the editing apps, which I use avidly, to where you are taking what you've recorded and altering it, filtering it, even maybe fixing it, really, right there on your phone. Wild that we can do that today. Just to think, like, not even 7 years ago, like, things are, like, 10 years ago, we weren't even doing this. And so with that, the repercussions, let's move on, is something that is imminent. There is, of course, great things that happen due to smartphones. So many innovations are made, so many connections are made, links are made to other people that you wouldn't have ever done before. Where the world is getting smaller thanks to social media and photo sharing. But the issue is the purists who want to use cameras, or even people who are trying to get rid of their cameras, it's getting a little harder. Because, or even the businesses who have focused in on using their cameras, like Kodak, Canon, all these other places, are kind of being hurt because of the minor purchases. So even back as soon as 2010, there were still 60% of digital imaging purchases were for cameras. And then now 40% was only camera phones. Just because at the time it was a little less, the use of smartphones was just kind of getting into gear. And then in 2017, 13% of digital imaging purchases was actual cameras. 8% was tablets have now been introduced, and then 79% were smart camera phones. And so the world is changing. Now, granted, there are exceptions to the rule. One of them being the MILCs, which is the mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras. So you get small digital cameras that have the ability to put super nice lenses on them so that you still get the physical camera feel, but you get the quick digital imaging, and it's something small. And so that has grown about 16.5% since 2016. Which is kind of cool, just so that you actually have something a little more mobile. And I know that I can think of, they're probably a lot more useful when you're filled with little kids that can lose your phone and break them. It's a lot easier having an actual camera that they can't touch. My mom did that. She loved it. She loved her camera. She kept it, and we weren't allowed to touch it, so that we could fill it with her phone, but we could not touch her camera. And another thing about that is that millennials are getting into, a lot of them, more into kind of a cultural age. They're looking back on the retro vintage things, kind of a more hipster era, really. And so film cameras are being picked back up again, as well as Polaroids. I actually have a Polaroid camera, and I love it just because it's instant and it's something recorded, and I don't have to pay to have it printed. Which is actually a lot of reason why digital imaging is becoming so popular, is because you don't have to pay. And so that has grown actually 30% since 2013. And so another repercussion, that's a little negative is actually the idea of Big Brother's watching. And so there's conspiracy theories, of course, that the government is bugging people's homes, that they are watching people through their TVs, that they are recording things on their phones, like not mobile phones, but actually like home phones and all this stuff, and landlines they're accessing, they're listening in. But really, they don't have to, because 80% of the 1.3 billion photos that were taken in 2017 so far, were put like 675 billion out of the 1.3 trillion, sorry, were posted through social media. And so, since they're being shared versus social media, and since algorithms now and things like Facebook are tying you and other people together because of your mobile phones or posting photos, and those mobile phones have GPS tracking, and so because of that, it's the location on that photo, it is tracking where you are most often, and where you're using Facebook most often, and where you're checking your phone so it can tell you where you are, and pick up people who are in the similar areas. And also, what it can do is pick up patterns of usage. So if you have an album you're adding photos to on Facebook, it'll maybe ask you, like, it'll give you a, like, hey, tag so-and-so in this. And you're like, how does that person know who that is? Well, because that person is showing up in other photos with you. And so it has recorded their face in face recognition, and so it recognizes them. It can recognize them in the background of your photo. It can recognize them when they're not in the photo because they're in other photos with you in a similar area. What computers can do today, and math is set up to do today, is basically find us wherever we're at because of what we post. And also, so if you want to kind of push this a little farther into kind of a conspiracy, is that if governments wanted to, all they would need to do is get access to Windows or Apple iCloud, get to yours, and they'll be able to locate for social media recordings and GPS location tracking exactly what you've been up to. Anything that you've saved, they would have access to. I know some of you guys, I can imagine, are kind of freaking out right now. I was freaking out a little bit, and some of you guys are like, you should have known this. I was describing this to a friend of mine earlier, and they're like, duh. I'm like, sorry, I didn't realize. No wonder people cover their computers. But not that they can turn on your computer's camera at any time. It's more or less that they can track you from previously recorded places that you've been. And so, granted, in the end, the whole moral of that story was the fact that they don't need to plant surveillance. You are your own surveillance for them. You're doing the job for them. Scary. So, moving on, of course, personal repercussions is the idea that with photo editing, you are creating an alternate reality. And so with the alternate reality from person to person, it creates an atmosphere of relative reality and relative truth. So what somebody believes is true or recording as truth is editing what's actually there, what's actually happening. And so it changes things. It changes your business. Why fake news is being so big right now, because people are editing actual truth to be exactly what they want it to, so they can project it to other people. So that's kind of scary. And that creates, though, a harsh individualistic culture and individuality that can be isolating and insecure. And so I think of like selfies. A lot of people are taking selfies now. What they do with those selfies is they alter it. They make their face thinner. They make their face less blemished. They make their eyes bigger. They add makeup. I think women are the biggest culprits of this. And so they fix things, they make things, they edit them because they want people to believe their pictures, and when they view the pictures that they somehow translate to reality. But it doesn't do that. And so that makes you more insecure, because when you look in the mirror and then you look at your pictures, they're different because you're making yourself into something you're not. And so in doing that, it makes you more insecure about what you actually look like. And so that's a scary thought. And so then you're altering reality. So you're trying to, through media and editing, alter people's perceptions of you. And so that doesn't create truth. It creates relative truth. And so that explains what is going on with such as this individualistic culture and these relative truth cultures, because people are wanting to record things that aren't real because they don't want to believe the things they're actually seeing. And so with that creates the question that I have, is in a world of constant social surveillance and digital photography, how should we as believers act? And so should we shun social media and shun digital imaging in a way where that we're putting our phones down, we're trading them in for dumb phones, we are trading in our social media and deleting it so that we can be different from the world and that we can record things with our eyes and on our phones and that we're fully present? Or are we going to try to use the things that have been placed in front of us, like our phones and social media, to project the gospel? Are we going to instead project truth instead of relativity in a way where that it expresses Christ in an image, and it expresses Christ in a post or in a photo, and whatever you're taking a picture of? Is it explaining something good? Are you using it to better the world for Christ, showing people the inner parts of who they are and not just expressing on the outside? So are you spending more time taking photos of yourself than taking photos of other people and encouraging other people and their beauty and loving on them? And so are you expressing Christ in that way, or are you becoming so self-centered that people can't even take Christ from you? And so it is up to you. Let me know, what do you guys think? Should we shun it or should we accept it and build on it? And so it was good to meet you guys. I hope you loved the video, and I hope you learned a lot. I love chapter 17. Definitely read it. And buy yourself a camera. It's worth it. All right, bye guys.